Okay, that's recording. And now this is recording. And here we are, back with another Sync Century. We're going to be looking at Monster Squad again. Is this part 2 or part 3 of Monster Squad? I don't remember how I cut it way back when. I think it's time to enter a new phase of the work, which is about polishing these diamonds. You know, we have so many of them now. And I'm just amazed by what we have. And yeah, there are complicated problems here because part of it's to do with the repetition. It's seeing these things again and again and again in the same context, with the same connective tissue around them always. And, you know, so to do that, you have to use some tricks, some tricks in your nice scripted documentary style video to try to convey to people the repetition, even though they're not going to themselves experience every point in the proof of that repetition. There's always going to be mysteries around it because it's a mystery. Synchronicity itself, and this particular vein of synchronicity that we've been exploring to do with 9/11 in these films. There are questions here that will never be resolved, at least not in my lifetime. I'm certain of that. So anyway, there are problems, there are maybe some solutions to those problems. But I think there's all kinds of material that doesn't need the repetition in order to have impact. And I meant it when I said I don't know what Monster Squad means. I mean, I know what it means in the broad sense. It's another one of these weird 9/11 movies, and therefore all of its contents are predictable on the basis of this map. Where should I go? I guess I'll go over here with the end tower. I guess it makes sense to get the projection space map up here right away, because we're looking at a match right away. This is where we left off. We're about to enter the school. We looked at all that stuff to do with the insane intro, with all the ritual sacrifice business, and I threatened to open this entropy topic. I think we're going to open it just very, very shortly here. I have to say, I prepared for that so much, and I had a really subtle understanding of Shannon's equations and all this stuff. And then my health crisis happened, and all that stuff just got blown out of my brain. And I don't have the energy or the wherewithal to get it back in now. So you're going to get a much cruder and less involved discussion of entropy, I'm afraid. But maybe that's for the best. Sometimes just the big picture is actually what you need. Anyway, these terms like projection space, these are neologisms of mine that were born out of a need in the analytic process. I define projection space as a set of imaginable images that can be layered onto a reference image with high-dimensional intersections of visual structure and conceptual meaning. Now, okay, I don't know if that's the definition or even a very good definition, but it's kind of the shortest and most concise definition: set of imaginable images that can be layered onto a reference image with high-dimensional intersections of visual structure and conceptual meaning. I mean, that pretty much says it. We're talking about pictures that can be stacked on top of other pictures in a literal way, right? So if you were to literally make these images semi-transparent and layer them, you would see that there are actual spatial, geometric, and color and other image structural correspondences between the layers. But also in some kind of way that's meaningful.
You're awake.
So that's projection space in a nutshell. There's one other aspect to it that could someday maybe be quite quantifiable. I'm thinking ahead here to neural network assistants and things like this, which is about the degree to which one of these images or a set of images corresponds to the reference object, to the reference image. It's like if you're looking at a cloud, you know, and trying to imagine shapes in that cloud. Well, what does that look like to you? We might say it's a slice of pizza. We might also say it's an ice cream cone. You know, someone else might say that this looks like an alligator. It's like, well, yeah, okay, you can kind of see maybe there's like the jaws and the eyes go up there or something. But it looks more like an ice cream cone than it looks like an alligator. So there is some kind of objective something there to do with the degree to which something you're projecting into an image is supported by the image itself. There are things that are more distantly related and things that are more closely related. Anyway, this is just technical stuff at this point. But I just wanted to talk a little bit about what this is for the benefit of anyone who's joining us just now, because I'm going to be talking about this movie Monster Squad. But right away, I want to note that it is, configured as a match. I think we saw on the way down, didn't we? Present day. You can see the antenna on the way down. Over here we have all the children, which is it's a projection space element, because the South Tower explosion looks quite a bit like a baby, kind of mixed with a weird dog. It's like a baby dog mutant thing with its throat being cut. So anyway, we get a bunch of kids here. I think we noted last time we do get a redhead. I've often looked at these two and wondered if they're not twins or sisters or something. There seems like a few sort of implications of doubles here. And then we've got these nice twin red doors signing it on the correct side. And of course, our favorite double rects. And so, we learned all this stuff last time narratively about this movie. It's to do with the band of freedom fighters and Van Helsing and all this stuff. That took place 100 years ago, I think, according to the narration, right? Now we are at present day, but of course this is the 1980s. And we are zooming in on a school. I said that this was significant in the blood pyramidal context because it is a place where people are programmed, basically. They're educated. It's where they learn about the reality definitions in their societies.
You two sitting comfortably? Good.
Are you two sitting comfortably? Good. This is the principal talking to our
Gentlemen.
or the first two child protags that we're going to meet. So here's our principal. He appears here in front of blinds, looking pretty any, dressed in blue, visor, in front of this kind of material on this kind of an object. Metal head, statue things, N element. All in all, quite N. And he's the kind of the lawmaker here and the one who controls the language and the books and everything. So,
See these file folders? The ones with your names on them? Can you guess what's in these file folders? I'll give you a hint. Discipline reports.
So, these two characters form a little matched pair, I would say. This child bears the sign of his birth, sunglasses. For those who don't know my lingo, blue stripes, and then he's in red with a shirt that I think says Stephen King Rules or something like that. It's interesting that he's marked as the king. I don't have it in the projection space map, but there might as well be a crown on that. So we're looking at an inversion here. This is the N and this is the S. And so on this side, we might as well put a crown in the projection space because it's often the king that's sacrificed. And the way that the 9/11 scene comes together is as some kind of a witnesser or maybe an executioner or something, but there's some figure watching another figure, which is this weird child animal thing being slaughtered, being sacrificed. So it could be the king being sacrificed. And we've seen S resonators associated with kings before, actually with Burger King in the case of Marty. So quite a lot going on there, I think, in this first image.
Of them. And some wonderful artwork as well. This is...
So I find this just incredible. Like, immediately we have this authority figure critiquing an artwork that the kids have made. And he's saying, what is this?
Spider with human head?
I'm sorry, spider?
With human head. Yeah, it's dogs and cats and rabbits.
Dogs, cats, rabbits, spider with a human head. These are all things, actually, that I would associate with the Atomic Kid. It could be a dog. You know? Woof woof. It could be like an orange cat. Like a Garfield-style cat. That color makes it look rather like an orange tabby. If you imagine these as like little feet, especially, you know. It could definitely be a rabbit because of the implication of buck teeth here in the front of the mouth. It could be a spider with a human head. I made this argument in Moonwalker because there's a lot of spider imagery in that film. One way this thing does kind of look is it just looks like a creature with kind of a mess of legs or limbs. But then it definitely has this humanoid sort of face or animal face. So spider with a human head, yes, that that definitely fits the projection space, as do those other... I didn't realize it was in the dark. My apologies. Hello. Definitely fits the projection space there, as do the other animals they mention. Anyway.
Does he?
Sean thought him up. You see, sir, we kind of have this monster club, okay? We draw those pictures to put on our clubhouse walls.
The boys have a club where they dream up monsters and then draw them. That, to me, sounds quite a bit like a Jungian active imagination process, doesn't it? They're going to get in touch with their unconscious by doing sort of art games drawn from fantasy, you know.
Correction, Mr. Crenshaw. You draw pictures during Mrs. Crossan's science class when you're supposed to be paying attention.
Wait,
I find it also notable that it's immediately juxtaposed against a science class, you know. It's like the scientific Western rationalist worldview versus this sort of artistic, fantasy-oriented worldview. Right away, the film gives us that as an overarching context.
I just want to say one thing. I mean, Miss Carlson's a nice teacher and all, but she's boring and has an odd-shaped head. That's why some of the guys call Meow Mix.
Here we get sort of our first taste of the weird, what I think is kind of the weird realism of this film. We see here just the kind of the callous brutality of children a little bit. He's just laying out these facts about this teacher. She has a weird shaped head, and so we think it makes her look like a cat. And so we call her this terrible name. But it's interesting because it's another sort of projection game. We see this person who has a shape that resembles a cat, so we associate her with a cat and call her Meow Miss or Mix or something. I don't hear exactly what he said, but so it's keeping it in this territory to do with fantasy, images, and visual projection, weirdly, in the subtext here.
Because her head shaped like a cat head. But I don't circus. How rude.
Boys, I hear you. I was a kid once. I thought monsters were cool. And maybe, well, gosh, maybe I'm just big kid because Sean, Patrick, I think science is cool. I dig it, man. I'm sure both of you know a great deal about monsters, but that's not the issue here. The issue is science is real.
In fact, that's not the issue. That's some kind of derangement that this person is in. The issue is you weren't paying attention in class, and you need to pay attention in class. But instead, he's made it into some kind of crazed reality definition thing. It's going to be like, science is real and monsters are fake.
Monsters are not.
So, why is it about ontological distinctions, which, first of all, this guy has no right to be making? So it is a realistic depiction of the way that adults wield power over children because they can, and because they're, I don't know, ideologically possessed, like maybe this guy is. But listen to what is said in response to this.
We don't know that, sir.
We don't know that. And this really infuriates this guy. But of course, that's really, really true. We don't know that. And so, considered as a thought experiment, this scene introduces us quite naturally to the idea of entropy. And it does it in this floating context to do with art, fantasy, and monsters within fantasy realized in artistic pictures. Pictures that look like other pictures of cat ladies with cat heads. Science is real, monsters are fake. Actually, how do we know what's real and what's fake? We don't know what fantasy is. In fact, we have uncertainty about that. So, first of all, if you think that Monster Squad is not a serious film, I don't know what film you're watching. This is a movie with heavy concerns. And you can see them right away here. How it's setting up all this pretty sophisticated stuff to do with art, reality, uncertainty, fantasy versus concrete, linear, rational thinking. They call that science, you know. Science is a richer and more diverse idea than just that, but it's clear how it's being used here, right? They mean sort of a popular scientific attitude, which just ultimately means a kind of naive realism that a lot of scientists wouldn't even agree with, quantum physicists and so on, you know. But nevertheless, that's how it's being used here in the narrative space. I want to talk briefly about entropy. Entropy is a way to measure uncertainty. It can be defined in some other ways, but I think thinking about it in terms of uncertainty just kind of makes the most sense and is definitely the most useful for our purposes. Now, whether or not it's actually measuring what we actually mean when we use the word uncertainty is, of course, a very much an open question. It measures something that definitely seems related to our common sense definitions of uncertainty. So I'm just going to write the equation up here really quick. We have h of x, actually it's eta, Greek character. But no one says eta. So h of x, the entropy of a random variable x, equals the negative sum of the probability of xi times the log. Sometimes you see this log b because you might want to express your entropy in things other than base 2, but usually when we're talking about entropy, we're dealing with base 2. So I'm just going to write 2 log 2 to the p of xi. I'm not sure if that's how you actually read it, how you vocalize this equation. But so there's the entropy equation. Now, what is this all about? Well, the main thing to understand about this is this notion of a discrete random variable. So I think the best way to get a handle on what a random variable is, the x in this equation, is to think in terms of a die. So let's draw a die up here. 1, 2, 3, etc. A die has 6 sides, so there are going to be, you're going to get sort of 1 out of 6 possible outcomes on each roll. Now, if it's a fair die, this is going to be the probability per side. So the probability that you're going to roll a 2 is 1 out of 6. The probability that you're going to roll a 6 is also 1 out of 6. So the probability that you're going to roll any particular number on one die is going to be 1 out of the 6 possible states. If it was an unfair die, let's say it was weighted so that it gave you more 2s than any other number, then you would have a different probability distribution. That's why discrete random variables have something called a probability mass function. That's just a function that describes what the probability is going to be for each state, because we can't assume that they're all going to be equiprobable all the time. Not everything is truly random like a die. And so if we want to measure the uncertainty involved in a given function or system, we can't assume that every state is equiprobable, because that would actually be maximum uncertainty, right? If you think about that, if you think about trying to predict something's state, if every state is just as likely to manifest as every other state, you can't make any prediction. So that's an interesting thing to know about entropy right away. Entropy, i.e. uncertainty, is highest when the states are equiprobable. A given random variable x is going to have a series of possible values. So we'll call them x1, x2, x3, etc. And then each one of those values is going to have another value associated with it, which is the probability. Like, say, 3 out of, let's say we have 10 possible states in this given random variable. And this one's going to be like 1 out of 10. And this one's going to be, what do we have left here? 6 out of 10, etc. That can't be right, because we have to leave. And the rest are all 0 out of 10. These states are not accessible. Just basically the list of numbers that specifies this is the probability mass function, also called the PMF. So that's just a bit about what a discrete random variable is. But what you ought to know about it is just that it's just going to represent possible outcomes of something, whatever it is that you're trying to measure. And the probability mass function is going to give you the associated probabilities per state. How you get your PMF is going to involve how you're doing your science. You're going to gather that information somehow and end up with that table. And then once you know that, you can calculate the entropy. And the entropy looks complicated, but really this stuff is really simple. So let's just take it block by block. This is a summation notation. I think the actual technical name for this is capital sigma notation. And this just specifies kind of a summing loop. Let's write it again down here. This up here is called the upper bound of summation. This is the index of summation, and then this is the lower bound of summation. So the way that this works is that we're going to add a bunch of these together, stepping through the index each time to increment the state that we're looking at in the discrete random variable. It's just a way to represent a potentially very long series of operations with a very simple, elegant notation that just gives you instructions on how to unpack this big list of additions. So all this is really saying is that for every state of the discrete random variable, we're going to add them together in this particular way. What are the chances of rain tomorrow? Well, there's going to be a particular uncertainty associated with that. And that's going to depend on what we know about the given state of the weather. So it's a bit complicated, actually. Given what we know, it might be very, very easy to make a confident prediction because it could be the middle of summer and there hasn't been rain in a month and there's not going to be tomorrow either. Or it could be that there was some rain today and it looked like it was clearing up, but it's not exactly certain and could go, there could be a lot of uncertainty involved if the weather system is behaving more dynamically. That would be you'd have different probability mass functions in those different scenarios. So according to whatever the probability distributions are of the actual system you're working with, you can calculate the average uncertainty involved in predicting any given state. So because we're dealing with an average, if you know about averages, you know that the way you calculate an average is you add up a bunch of numbers and then divide it by the total number of numbers. And so that's basically what we're going to do here. We're going to just add up all of these individual probabilities. And then actually what we're going to do is we're going to multiply them by the log base 2. So the log is used for various reasons. It's kind of part of what gives the equation its magic. If you think about what an equation is, it's just a mathematical object that has certain properties that make it useful for modeling something else. So in this case, we have this concept of uncertainty, which is also something that we can rigorize and quantify a little bit if we think mathematically. So then we develop this thing called the entropy equation because it maps, actually, it describes this concept. The fact that it can do that is a weird miracle. And actually, I think there's a proof showing that this particular equation is unique, that there isn't going to be some other equation that has all these properties. And what are those properties? Well, there's a whole bunch of them. Just to give you kind of an idea of what I mean, like one of these properties is we want this number, h of x, to be the highest when all the states are equiprobable, right? Because that would describe like a die again, or a fair coin with heads or tails, right? A coin being tossed, that's a 50-50 probability. That's maximum entropy. So this number needs to be really high when all the states are equiprobable. That means we have the most uncertainty about it if there's no sort of reason to think one state is more likely than any other state. And so it turns out that this particular equation has that property, along with a whole bunch of other properties that you want to have to make this entropy idea go. But so, what is all that really in the end? Well, it's a complicated question to do with the philosophy of mathematics, which bleeds into very complicated questions to do with ontology and phenomenology. Math is something we encounter in our heads, and it's something that follows particular rules, and it seems to be a kind of modeling language. But it's very hard to know actually what that's all about. We can just know that we can discover these things in the mathematical landscape that behave in ways that are analogous to these things we know from the natural landscape, like the phenomenon of uncertainty, which is simply a fact that we have to deal with as human beings. So, thanks to Shannon, we have this nice equation that can help us quantify this idea. And I think that the idea of uncertainty is very, very important when it comes to thinking about models and the way that people use models to structure reality. There's a degree of uncertainty involved in any use of a model to understand reality, and that makes human beings very agitated. And so they repress a lot of that uncertainty. And that repression of the uncertainty about their models in particular, a whole lot of the religious stuff is tied up with that, because it's all about the reality constructing and receiving apparatus of the psyche, ultimately. So entropy is very important to that conversation, I think, and very important to the themes in this film. We've just been introduced to the idea of entropy or uncertainty not in a mathematical way, in this implicit thematic way. But I wanted to get the equation up and talk about it a little bit explicitly, because I think it's very useful to think about this stuff in terms of possible states. And, as soon as you realize, equiprobable means maximum entropy, so what would be the lowest entropy? Can you guess what it is? Well, it would just be the opposite. It would be something that always returned one state. So if you had a die where every side was a 1, that's an exploded die. If every side is going to yield a 1, the chance of getting a 1 is 100%. And so that's going to actually be the lowest entropy. That's going to be an entropy of 0, because you have complete certainty. That thing is always going to give you a 1. Now, you might notice right away that although that die is always going to return a 1, something else could happen that might make it not return a 1. Like someone could kick the die into the ocean that's nearby, or, I don't know, something could happen and someone could spill gasoline on it and it could incinerate, or who knows. There are these weird outlier possibilities. So of course it's not really 0 entropy if you consider the fact that the local stability of this discrete random variable is probably contingent on the stability of other complicated situations in which it's nested that have their own entropy calculus to account for, just something to think about. Okay. Like I said, originally I had planned we were going to really go through this equation and plug numbers into it, and also think about like ball counting games, like, balls in buckets, like all this kind of stuff. But we're not going to do any of that kind of stuff. Instead, we're gonna leave it at that very kind of speed run idea, just to sort of think very quickly about entropy. I'd just like to say one last thing about it, which is that if you want to know more about entropy, there are tons of great teachers on YouTube. I want to progress with the film now, but I'm going to take a short break. Forever Pictures, sailing through time. Okay.
Can you believe Mr. Metzger? Tell me about it. Touch me, patting my shoulders and stuff.
The girl is fully homework now.
I smell like the 40s.
When they send you to school, what they tell you about the homos and the people with cat heads. Oh!
Here they accuse the principle of homoing out, fondling them, etc. If you have delicate sensibilities about that kind of stuff, this is not the movie for you. It's full of 80s humor that hasn't aged tremendously well, although I'm not actually sure that it's being deployed in an ultimately humorous context here, is the thing. It's one of those movies where I think these jokes are actually probably pretty thought about in more than one context. As I think I mentioned in the last part, this is a film that goes on to thematize the Holocaust and just a bunch of weird stuff. So anyway, here's our pair again. We see here Stephen King rules. Yep, again, the visor, blue stripage. He's holding the skateboard, interestingly. They really mark him as the blue one here. There's quite a bit of blue. This says the Supreme Court. I think one way you might think about the North Tower is as a big judge or something. So I find this scene interesting because of how true it is to the characters, while also working as a little bit of a theme driver. Because on the one hand, it says something true, I think, about the educational system, which is that there are lots of dangers, actually, that children encounter, that they aren't prepared for exactly because they aren't problems that are allowed to be on the books, so to speak. When I was in high school, there was a teacher who sexually abused students. I'm not sure how many boys she slept with. We only know, or at least I only know about the one. It was a huge scandal. he was very, very popular and liked, and so it shouldn't be this way, but because of the nature of the social hierarchy, it was an even bigger deal than it would have been, if it had been, well, someone like me, or maybe even someone even more on the periphery of the high school universe, because I was actually a bit of a shapeshifter. I was definitely a weirdo, but I've always had my charm. So I was able to kind of get along with a lot of these different groups in high school. So I'm just partially just like free associating on like schools and the experience of growing up in schools and stuff now. The thing is, I could have told them that this lady was nuts. Like I knew she was nuts. I had a shirt that was like a heavy metal shirt that had like a devil horns hand on it, like stylized, on like drawn on the shirt, and underneath it said, "Keep music evil," or something like that. And this teacher, she was a drama teacher, and I was in drama, of course. And she was like, she confronted me about the shirt and asked me about what my relationship to evil was. And I was like, I don't know. It's like metal, It's like heavy guitars. Like I was trying to explain it because I thought it was obvious that this was about. It was a music shirt, But no, she was actually asking about like metaphysical evil, because then she immediately went into this like, do you believe in Satan thing? And I was like, no, I don't think Satan's real. Like, I would answer differently now, actually. But at the time I was quite an atheist. And I said, I think Satan's just this thing people made up, And she was like, she got very serious. And she was like, Satan is absolutely real. And he controls the media. And he controls all the music that you listen to. And I don't remember exactly what she said after that, but it was with the extreme heaviness that she like laid down like the law of the reality of Satan, and how my immortal soul was very much in danger of. And it was with complete dead-eyed seriousness. There was not even a hint of kind of like, I understand that we might have different beliefs about this. It was just like, so I was not surprised by it when it happened. But anyway, I bring this up because these things exist in schools, and it's unreal the degree to which people will just repress and rationalize away warning signs. The conversation that she had with me was inappropriate. It was an attempt to kind of religiously terrify a youth, I was immune to it, of course, but a different kid might not have been so much. And just that was not okay, But no one ever wanted to see or act on any of those sort of small things. And anyway, I'm not suggesting that people should be persecuted for having little personality quirks. I'm the last person who would suggest something like that, But I just mean that immediately this film is showing us shadow material. It's showing us exactly things that we would just prefer not to think about and oughtn't to exist, and they make us very uncomfortable to think about. But that actually empowers the phenomenon, because then we're not looking where we should, and these things can go unchecked. And it's interesting. I'm not sure on the basis of how it's shot here. I hear you. Does he touch the kid?
I thought monsters were cool.
He does, but not really in a...
Well, gosh. Maybe I'm just a big kid because Sean, Patrick...
So, I don't see anything on camera that reads to me as if this teacher is inappropriately touching this kid. Now, maybe that's because it happens off camera. And maybe that's intentional. Who knows? I'm not sure exactly what the film is suggesting here. Right away, the film is talking about what's real and what isn't. He's saying monsters aren't real. Science is real. And then right after that, we get this thing about, why don't they tell you about the people that are going to molest you in school? Why don't they warn you about that? Well, they don't warn you about it because they don't want to believe that it's real. So it's like right away the film is saying, who's living in the fantasy, actually? It's the adults that are living in a fantasy. And in particular, adults are living in a fantasy about the reality that children are living in. Because children are living in the real world right away, just like everyone else. Children are just as, we try to shield children from the traumatic aspects of reality, but those attempts are imperfect. Only an insane egoist would imagine that they could absolutely protect their child from experiencing any of the traumas that exist in the world. So children are in the real world and navigating real dangers. At least I was when I was a kid. It's the adults often who want to live in the so-called adults who want to live in the illusion of certainty. I think we cling to our fantasies more strongly the older that we get. I'm always doing this funny Jung double game thing, of course. Right? What I mean by that is that the models of the world that we make or that we learn through experience, we believe in those more and more as we age. So the worldviews that we have, the beliefs that we have, they become entrenched often by the time we're adults, and then we start to take them seriously as reality, even though they're complete contrivances. When you're young, paradoxically, you're more in fantasy of the inner sort, of the spiritual sort. You're more immersed in dreams. You're more in touch with the world of the dead, I would say, when you're young. Et cetera, et cetera. More prone to daydreaming and more creative often. But you also, I think, are perceiving the world a bit more clearly often than adults are, because you're not filtering it through a bunch of paradigmatic trash yet. You don't have a whole bunch of sophisticated languaged models that are telling you reality is some certain way. You don't have the luxury, actually, of having those maps, because you're still building them. And so when you're just starting out, when you're just making your maps, you're surrounded by maximum what? Entropy. You're surrounded by maximum uncertainty when you don't have maps yet. So that's the situation you're at when you're a child. Your models aren't fully developed yet, at least the ones that can be made or learned, or maybe that's the same thing, etc. You don't have them yet. So there's a whole bunch of the world that is very, very mysterious and therefore threatening, and quite uncertain. And so it's very correct that the film makes the kids the ones that are in touch with the reality of uncertainty, which is the most real thing we can be in touch with, actually, as human beings. The reality of our uncertainty is deeper even than the reality of our own experience. Our experience is kind of suspended in this cloud of uncertainty. Now, it's funny and complicated because there are also things that are certainties. Like the certainty of uncertainty, for instance. There's a nice, stupid, paradoxical one right away, We can be very certain that we are in an uncertain situation. So there are still like meta certainties, etc. However, there are also meta uncertainties, etc. So it's a strange kind of infinite ladder that emerges when we think about uncertainty. And I want to note that here. We might want to circle back around to that at some point and explore that, because I have a hunch that ideas that have that quality are of alchemical significance somehow. Anytime when you're thinking and suddenly you see there's a weird little infinite regress, there's a strange loop there, or there's a strange, something structurally interesting is happening in your head there. I'm just admiring the composition we have on the screen here now. So anyway, on the one hand, the film is acknowledging the fact that children live in the real world, in a certain sense, more than the adults do. But on the other hand, it also situates that stuff directly next to kind of like blood pyramid hierarchy games. Can you believe that principle inappropriately touching me, whether or not we think that's actually happening here, you know? But it's like, what a homo, he homoed out on me. So right away there's a connection drawn between like a pedophilic interest and a homosexual interest. It's all used pejoratively. So there's like a clear other in this situation, and the other is the homo, right? It's very ugly in that way. And it's kind of like, it's interesting because the movie gives you two examples of it right away, which makes me think that it's not just casual. It gives you that one, which if you're an audience member of like a young male in the 1980s, you might kind of casually laugh along with that. But then this other thing about the cat head lady just seems kind of mean, doesn't it? I mean, imagine for a minute that the other one doesn't seem mean. Transport yourself into the 1980s and into the headspace of some asshole, you know? The second one, though, it just seems like they're making fun of this lady in a kind of mean-spirited way. And then the film kind of plays it up because they have, I forget, is it Sean, I guess? Because they have Sean collide with her more or less right away. And they kind of draw out the awkwardness of the moment, you know? And they show this teacher's face and like how hurt she is, I think, actually. Now, it's funny that that book said physical examination, because then that's exactly what goes on here. There's like a double meaning in it already, because it could refer back to what Patrick was saying about, I hope I have their names right, what Patrick was saying about the principal, as if the principal gave them an inappropriate physical examination. And again, I'm still thinking maybe that's actually happening. So it could refer back to that, but then it also seems to refer to Sean performing a physical examination of this lady's head. And remember, this is all set up in the dialogue for us in this preceding scene. She has this head that looks like a cat head, so we call her Miss Meow Mix or whatever it is. But I would never call her that because how rude, you know. They're already kind of making fun of her. And then here we see what the reality of it is. And first of all, I think she looks rad. Like, okay, and listen to what they say as they walk away.
Meow. Very charming. Oh my God. Some guy kissed her at night. I mean, a priest said, I now pronounce you man and wife, and it was okay with them.
Listen to how cruel they are to her. So, I don't know. I don't think we're meant to just kind of go along with it. I think that the film is showing you the cruelty of children deliberately. It's showing you that these kids are immersed in these kinds of anxieties and power struggles and judgments and sort of social sadism status games just as much as any adults are. And that's my recollection of this particular period of childhood. I was at a school where this stuff was very amped, and kids haven't learned really to control their brutality yet, actually. Again, it's another example of kind of it's the adults that are living in the fantasy. When you're a child, you know that other kids are vicious, and that you're also capable of great viciousness. Adults prefer to whitewash childhood of that stuff and imagine that kids are these innocent beings. They're not. They're already human beings, and they're already partaking of the double nature of human beings. Kids are also evil. Kids are very, very evil, and I remember that evil very well. And evidently so do the people that wrote Monster Squad, because they're representing it for us here very accurately, I think.
Hey, where's that kid?
And then immediately say, hey, where's Fat Kid? And so here's Fat Kid. And I'm going to give some spoilers about this. Like, Fat Kid, whose actual name is Horace, he has one of the most transformational and like best character arcs in the film. A lot of attention is paid to this character. And they really... the narrative goes through great pains to give him substantive moments of triumph throughout the story. So the fact that the characters are disparagingly referring to him as Fat Kid is something that we can't associate with the actual perspective of the people writing the piece. And in particular, it's about him reclaiming his name. So it's a major kind of identity issue. And so the fact that all that stuff is bunched together, making fun of homosexuals and comparing them to pedophiles kind of implicitly in the structure of the language, and making fun of this teacher for having a weird hairstyle, and then attacking her virility in some ways, saying, oh my God, I can't believe anybody would think of her sexually, et cetera, all this kind of stuff. And then immediately from that into where's Fat Kid? It sets it all up as like, our protagonists are not separate from these power games and from these social violences. They're very much embedded in this fabric, as one is already in childhood. And so we're going to just see that stuff start to unfold here directly now, because we immediately get this bullying scene with Horace.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to our show. Tonight's question: what makes Fat Kid fat? Fat Kid?
I'm here, EJ.
Get out of here, EJ. No, not a good answer. Doesn't make any sense. Let's go to our man on the street, Derek. Hi, I'm Derek. I'm in the street where Fat Kid is walking track. Fat Kid, can't you stop eating?
Look, I have a glandular problem, okay? At least I don't have a stupidity problem.
It's actually a great line.
You say faggot. What did you say? My name's Horace. Horace. Oops. It's alright. I guess I must have a stupidity problem. What'd you say, faggot? What'd you say?
You're an asshole.
And here comes Rudy as like the enforcer of righteous social justice or something. I'm not sure exactly. These are complicated scenes already. We might have to double around through them, you know. Now, Rudy's an interesting kid, because he's clearly like an older kid. And also a very pure N resonator for obvious reasons. And just a hilarious example of like 80s cool kid, like kid chameleon archetype, you know? Smoking cigarettes in a just a terrible example of Hollywood glamorizing cigarette smoking for no reason. Although perhaps here it's for a reason, to do with our favorite topic. A nice redhead in the background here. So he's all those things, but then he's kind of hanging around with these like younger kids. So what's Rudy's issue exactly? Why can't he socialize with people his own age?
Hey, Rudy. EJ.
See, you met my friend Horace. You okay?
Rudy,
It allows him to be absolutely at the top of this social hierarchy here. So maybe it's about him maintaining control.
You dropped your candy bar, EJ.
It is.
It's yours now.
Rudy.
Rudy!
Rudy, I'm not gonna see
Eat up! And we'll call it a day.
So it's interesting that Rudy doesn't just break up the fight. He also administers a punishment, right? And look at how satisfied Horace is to see that justice administered. Also, look at how he's marked by the yin yang. Isn't that wonderful? Also, how weird is it that his name is Horace? We'll have to think a little bit about that one, probably. I'm not sure exactly how to interpret that at the moment. I hope all these things will become clear as the film goes along. I love this whole opening because it just gives us a real nice set of elements with which to think about blood pyramidal issues right away. First of all, I just want to note that all of this is taking place in a group context, right? It's public bullying that's happening kind of in the center of the town square, as it were. And it shows us that although Horace is himself the recipient of a lot of social violence from higher levels in the various hierarchies to which he's subjected, that he's, of course, not above experiencing some... I would still categorize this as a sadistic sort of satisfaction, even when it's morally justified in this kind of way, This is a face of satisfaction as if one has eaten a candy bar. That's what's interesting to me. And it is satisfying. And the way that we enjoy these films is often proof of how satisfying that is. Because a lot of what American films really learned how to do well, I kind of would argue, over the course of the 1980s. And Spielberg really pioneered this, and unfortunately did it in a kind of racist way and so on as well. But American cinema really figured out how to code protagonist and antagonist structures so that you could figure out very quickly who's good and who's evil in a given context. So essentially it consists of a lot of kind of quick psychological techniques that can be used to manipulate you so that you will get a big sort of pent-up feeling of disgust or annoyance or rage or some combination of things against a certain character. So that, and actually I'm thinking here of like an example from Gremlins, like they do this with Mrs. Deagle. They really make you hate Mrs. Deagle because they show her trying to get Barney and all this kind of stuff, the dog in that film. And so when Dante launches her out of the window later in the film, we take a sadistic delight in it, and we see an image on the wall there. I think it's meant to be Miss Deagle's husband, like with a similar look of sadistic satisfaction on his face, sort of oriented in the direction even of Mrs. Deagle as she catapults out the window. It's funny, really, because what Joe Dante has done there is he's shown you a quite horrific image that's Red Twin signed, incidentally. He's just thrown an old lady out of a window and killed her. It's grisly. But he's made you not only find it kind of comical, but he's made you take a delight in it. And he's done that purely by how he's constructed the value system that defines the pretend movie world that he's built. So it's a little exercise in how perspective can be constructed in such a way to set up the conditions for experiencing a particular kind of pleasure, which is at root a sadistic kind of pleasure that relates to the idea of seeing something suffering, especially in public. And so that's just what's happening here. And the film, it just gives this to us right away in the establishing sort of context scenes. This is like introducing us to the reality of these kids, and it's a reality in which these issues to do with violence, social hierarchy, group effects, morality, sadistic satisfaction, reality, unreality, monsters, and uncertainty are like major issues. Does this seem like a dumb 80s comedy to you? Because I don't know, it sure doesn't to me. It doesn't seem anything like that. It seems like a movie with a lot of, like I said, heavy thoughts motivating it. I don't understand really how these films get the reputations that they get. I think it just has to do with the fact that people aren't very good at looking past the surface style very, very often. So this thing comes dressed in the style of an 80s genre thing. But that's not at all what it's up to. It's a very thoughtful film, actually. Okay. I think I might want to be done for tonight. It's getting late. Well, by my standards, I'm an old man, so we barely made it through any of this movie, but that's okay. That's just how it goes here on Sync Century. So thank you everyone for hanging out with me, and I'll see you in the future. Bye.